Start recording. Where we go, recording in progress, and welcome to another of our weekly moments and the Leadership Roundtable. So what have we got on today's agenda? Well, today's agenda, what I wanted to do is do something a little bit different today. I wanted to just have a high level conversation that is really to give you some tips that we help businesses with when they are designing or when they're writing digital and transformation strategies. Now, when I say digital and transformation strategies, I'm talking quite broadly, right? I mean, it could be the digital and transformation strategy, which is overarching for the organization, but it could be a digital and transformation strategy for a department. It could be a digital transformation strategy for a product or service, or even perhaps a team. So when I'm going through my 5 things today, what I want you to do is I don't want you to think necessarily about a strategy that might be somebody else's responsibility. It's just think to yourself, which strategies do I actually have some control over within my area and my own practice? Because there's so many different levels when I talk to that. And as always, yes, Mel's got to start her weekly moment Leadership Roundtable with a quote. And today's quote comes from Ryan Gottfredson. And he's a mindset guru. And he says, it's not culture that eats strategy for breakfast, it's mindset. And I tend to believe him. I absolutely agree with that. It's mindset that eats strategy for breakfast. What a lovely quote to energize us up, ready for today's roundtable. I'm going to try today perhaps to speak a little bit less in terms of presentation and just try and get a little bit more conversation going based on the 5 tips that I want to share with you today. Some of them you will have heard of before, but I want to introduce some new things as well. So tip number 1, dead easy. This one is a revisit of things that we have talked about in previous leadership roundtables, but of course it's purpose. Now, so often when we are writing strategies, whether it's digital or transformation, we tend to lose sight of purpose. And what I'm saying here is, when we're writing strategies, it's this is the product that we are designing because this is what it's going to do for the organization. This is the new technology that we're going to be delivering because this is what it will do for that department. This is the new structure because this is what it's going to be doing for our productivity. And those are all great things, but they don't directly connect to a human. And if we are able to add a purpose to the strategic direction, then what we're able to do is connect to the human. So it's no longer about strategy being disconnected from us because it's process, technology, structural, and organizationally connected. It's also human connected. And if you remember a few weeks ago, we talked about this in detail, and I said the easiest way to connect humans to strategy is to go to the Sustainability Development Goals, because you will find there that there is always a purpose that will connect to a strategy, regardless of how pure you might feel that strategy is from a product or a structure or a technology perspective. So tip number 1 to humanize your digital or transformation strategy is make sure that you have in that strategy a purpose to connect to it. So that's tip number 1. Tip number 2 is human. And this is really kind of talking to the quote at the start that mindset eats strategy for breakfast. In our strategies, or more often than not, we're talking about what we want people to do. We're talking about perhaps the skills that we need in our people so that they can do what they need to do. And it's very much about do, and what we need to do in our strategies in order to humanize it is talk about who as well as what. And there's 2 things for me that are really important about this. In our strategies, we should always ensure that there is narrative in there is space and time in there for 2 things. Number 1, that we talk to person not persona. And a lot of the time in strategies, you will notice that we have these personas and avatars and these aggregated views of our customers and our end users, or the employees, and they're all good for some, for the organization, but they are not humanizing our strategy. They're not humanizing our digital transformation. And if we want to humanize our transformation, we need to have real people in our strategies, or in our strategies say that it's going to be about humans and not about personas. Which brings me to the second point around the human, applying human to strategy, is that element of observation. So what we need to do is we need to ensure that we are absolutely building individual human stories into our strategies, whether it's inclusive in our strategy or whether we're saying as part of our strategy, as part of our delivery of this digital transformation, as part of our new program, what we're going to do is we're going to capture real human stories. And the reason why this second point is so incredibly important is this, because if we capture human stories, if we focus on person, not persona, then what it means is we can have an entire flow path. And flow paths will be one of our weekly moment focus areas in the future. But what I mean by a flow path is this. It's very easy for us to include in strategies what we want people to do and even what we want people to say, and that's action. It's equally relatively easy for us to include in our strategies behavior, how we want people to do things, and how we want people to feel about the new structure or the new department or the new technology. It's harder for us to say how we want people to think about it, how we want people to believe in that particular strategy, in that new state that we're designing. So mindset, behavior, action. That's what we call a flow path in humanizing transformation. And there's never a better time to introduce the idea of flow paths and to include the human than in the strategy itself. Yeah, the human is not the output, the human is the input. So if we can include flow paths and really bring mindset into tangible language in our strategies, then brilliant. Because I don't know about you, but a lot of the time when I'm reviewing digital strategies or transformation strategies, I see the word mindset in the introduction. I see the word mindset in the narrative, but I am not able to really understand what people mean by that. And if you add flow paths to it, this is what we want people to do. This is how we want people to do it. This is what we want people to think when they are in this new state. This is what we want people to believe when they're in this new state. We have a flow path and people will understand what we mean by mindset. Really, really interesting point. So that's my second tip for today. Make sure that we have that human element, person, not persona, flow path to create tangible understanding around what we mean by mindset in our strategies. And tip number 3 is leadership belief. What do I mean by this? Oftentimes when we have strategies that we want our leaders to sponsor, that we want ourselves as potentially we are the leaders, that we want to communicate our strategy out to the world. And we say, look at this wonderful strategy. These are the 3, 4, or 5 bullet points of our strategy. These are the 3 outputs. These are the 2 outcomes. This is what we're going to achieve. It's all what. And again, that creates a social distance. It creates a disconnect between the human and the transformation or the digital transformation. What we want to do is humanize transformation to connect the 2 together. So what we mean by leadership belief is if you've got outputs, if you've got goals, if you've got outcomes identified in your strategies, all you need to do is reposition them into beliefs. So I believe that as a result of, we will be as human beings. We will be more courageous in this way. We will be able to think in this way. We will be able to behave. But it's really important for us to create narrative statements to communicate to people around belief, because it gives you identity. And what it does is it connects intangible strategy, organizationally driven strategy, to human change and human transformation. So tip number 3, a really, really, really important tip, is include leadership belief statements. And all you need to do is just get your outputs, get your goals, get your outcomes, whatever they are, and just reversion them into identity statements and use those to promote and communicate, and get the leaders to socialize those in the way that they are sponsoring the change and transformation. That's tip number 3. Tip number 4 is my future. Now, there's a couple of things for me to share with you about my future, tip number 4. The first one you will have heard me talk about on numerous occasions, because it's so incredibly important to humanizing transformation, and it's that sense of observation. So it kind of ties in with purpose a little bit, but if we are able to observe how people are, thinking, behaving, and acting, then we are able to add truth data into our strategy. So it's really important for us to ensure that we are including the idea of observation, that we are including observational time, resource, and space into our strategic direction, into our strategy and strategic narrative. So that's really important, observation. So get observation in there, because observation allows us to gather the truth data of what people are thinking, their beliefs, their rituals, as well as behavior, as well as actions. But the other thing is allowing people the space and time to discover who they are and their own value contribution to the strategy. And this is something that we miss so often in digital strategies and transformation strategies, is placing time and space for individuals in the organization, the people that are going to be impacted by the strategy, allowing time and space and designing experiences for each person to explore and to identify their place in the future, their value contribution to the future, their place in the future. It is not our place as practitioners of change and transformation to identify that. As much as we think it is, it's not in a new world. It is for each individual human being to find their own place. And if you allow people to explore their future self based on a strategy, then what that allows you to do is it allows you to humanize it in a really, really strong way, because people are connected to it, which means that there'll be meaning to it. It means that there'll be purpose behind it. It means that there'll be motivation for them to engage in change. And this is a brilliant one to release limiting belief. It's a brilliant tip to release change, change resistance in an organization, getting people to explore their future self. So 2 things to this tip number 4 is observation. Make sure that that's in our strategy, that there's resource and commitment to it. And number 2, that there's space and time and experiences designed for each individual to explore how their value contribution connects and what their future self looks like in that new state. So that's tip number 4. Tip number 5, strategy is not a plan. What on earth do I mean by this? Well, this one is a little bit more complicated, but it's a really important piece. What we tend to do when creating strategies is we tend to try and get everything, everything that we want to do and how we want to do it in that strategy. And then once that strategy has been designed, then we're ready to actually create our plans, and decide we already know who we're going to collaborate with. What I'm saying here is this: in our strategy, what we ought not to be doing is identifying the plans that are required, and equally the collaborative partners that are required to design those plans and deliver those plans. Our strategy should only be saying, let's bring our partners together to then create the plans that will deliver this strategy. So even though strategy is about how, it's not the plan as well. And a lot of the time what we do is at the end of our strategy we say, right, and these are the plans that we're going to deliver. But there's a step in between, and the step in between is what we call cross collaboration. And if you look at the work of Mariana Mazzucato in the University College London, she talks about this in how we pivot from visions and strategies to missions and moonshots. And the key difference is this: instead of going from strategy direct to plan, what you do is you go from strategy to cross collaboration to plan. And it's a really, really interesting point. And if you'd like to know more about that one, we can go into it in our open discussion at the end of this roundtable. But it's a very, very, very interesting point to consider and to reflect upon if you're writing strategy, or the next time you're writing strategies for your organization, for your service area, for your product, who knows. I said 5 tips, and you all know me by now. I've actually put in two extra ones for us. So tip number 6 is how many right answers. And what I mean by this is, don't think that your strategy is the solution. And we often think that the strategy is the solution, and the strategy is not the solution. So if we are able to use our strategy to identify multiple potentialities, if we use our strategy, instead of our strategy being, this is the single how, we use strategy to identify how many right answers, how many hows there might be. What we're doing here is something really important. We are setting up our transformation for agility. We're setting up our transformation for agile at scale. We are allowing that sense of flexibility right at the very start. Because if we've got this sense of there's more than one way this can go, it means that the strategy itself is becoming adaptive in its own narrative. And we don't have to say, this is the single way we're going to go. Oh, and by the way, we're going to be agile on that journey. Because what we're saying is the journey itself might pivot, but there's only one solution. There was always going to be multiple solutions. So tip number 6 is very much about how we try and infuse in our strategy right at the very start this sense of agility and adaptability by saying and identifying how many right answers. What I don't want anybody to do today is confuse this tip with what I often see in strategies, which is a little bit influence driven, is this. So there might be 3 ways we can go. There's one way we can go, which is going to be high investment. There's another way we can go, which is going to be middle investment. And there's another way we can go, which is going to be low investment. And the outputs of those 3 will be A, B, and C. And what you're doing there is basically you're setting up your strategy for people to choose either 1 or 2 or 3. So you're basically trying to influence a single direction. That's not what I mean here. What I'm saying here is genuinely saying and identifying in the strategy the how for us delivering this digital transformation or transformation is based on A, B, C, D, and E. These are the multiple right answers we have identified. And what you're doing then is you're saying cross-collaboratively, and the plans that we design and the plans that we green light will be based on experimental practice, will be based on adaptability. And what you're doing is you are seeding foundations of agility right at the very start. It's a crucial tip to remember in any strategy that we're writing or leading. And the final wee little tip for today, she says, the wee little tip for today, so there's a little bit of Scottish nuance in there for those of us that are joining from the north of the country of UK, is small is beautiful. And I'm sure that most of you know what I mean by this. It is so important for us to recognize that transformation, that strategic transformation or digital transformation should not be separate to business as usual. Our strategy should be about how transformation can be delivered within business as usual. And of course, the answer to how is by making micro shifts. The answer to how is by bringing tiny little essences, lighting lots of fires, as Jose said in a masterclass that I delivered yesterday. A gentleman called Jose Franco from Ocado. He talked about lighting small fires, and that's really what we mean here, is trying not to eat the whole thing, but really trying to think about, how do we bring the future into now? How do we bring the future into the now? And the way that we do that is by small, tiny shifts. And if you remember from last week, one of the banana skins I gave last week was, don't get caught up and confuse small with slow, because small does not mean slow. They are two very, very, very separate things. When somebody is saying to you, oh, you know, that's too big for us, that's too courageous for us, we're not brave enough, we're not ready for that, we need to do something small, we need to do something smaller, that's really saying we want to do something slower. What we're talking about here is tiny little shifts that are designed from the future, that are familiar enough to be applied to now, but we're shifting towards the future. So in your strategy, small is beautiful. How are you articulating that transformation or digital transformation is going to be part of business as usual? It's not going to be an innovation lab. It's not going to be a fancy project management office over there. They're all great for delivery. They're all great for experimentation. But what you want to do is you want to start transformation in business as usual right on day one of delivery. So how do you include that in your strategy? And those are the 7 tips for humanizing any strategy that you might be involved in. And it might be a strategy for delivering a learning and development program. It might be a strategy that's about moving from on-premise to cloud from a technological perspective, or it might be a full-blown organizational digital transformation or transformation. The key thing is how do you humanize right from the get-go in that strategic narrative? And these 7 tips, if you're able to apply them in your strategy, you know that you'll be able to connect at a human level. And if you connect at a human level, that means that you will be able to allow people to release limiting beliefs around change and transformation. You'll be able to engage people and motivate people. What you're doing is you're connecting humans to the future, which means, of course, they're going to want to be involved because they can see that they belong to it. And that's a really important element of success in humanizing transformation. So I've left a couple of things in here in terms of small is beautiful, and we've talked about these, but I cannot stress enough that idea of, you know, implementing the Maya principle. So get Maya socialized, you know, the minimum viable shifts, get it socialized into your strategy, into your direction. And what that will mean is that you're then able in your strategy to potentially talk about moonshots, to potentially talk about the language of missions to moonshot, to potentially talk about how we think, how we feel and behave, and what we do. So it's really trying to think about the who we are, how we operate and practice in business as usual, what we do in practice of business as usual. So the who we are, the how we do it, as well as the what we say. And these things are really, really important for us to include in our digital transformation, in our transformation strategies. Now, that kind of brings us to a close. Of course, I've got my banana skins, so I'm going to tell you about my banana skins in a moment. But as always, I just want to share with everybody, we're really excited that we've got our new Practitioner Leadership Academy that opens at the end of this month. And if you look into the chat, you can see that I've popped my Calendly link in there. So if you'd like to know a little bit more about how you yourself might want to become a practitioner, we've got a couple of practitioners online today, so you know, you might be able to share some stories. But if you want yourself to understand what does it mean to be a practitioner of humanizing transformation, or indeed explore what it means for us to help leaders adopt the mindset of humanizing transformation and become modern role models themselves, then please do just feel free to use that link and to pop some time in my diary to join a strategy session where we can talk about you humanizing transformation in your context, how agile at scale is the one missing piece, right? We have agile for projects and programs. We have ProSci for the steps and the processes of change, but what's missing is the mindset. And humanizing transformation is all about bringing that lovely secret weapon into play. And that's what you can do here. And that gives you the accelerated success, which is what we're all really after with all of our strategies. So what are today's banana skins? Well, the 2 banana skins I want to share with everybody today are these. From here, we will get there is not the right way of thinking, right? It's not the right mindset. And it's the traditional mindset for strategy. Where we are now, from there we will go there, from there we will go there, from there we will go there. You all hopefully now will be well versed with it is from the future we reverse engineer back to today. Yeah, we create forward and we measure backwards. So please, in your strategy, in your narrative, in your design and your delivery, try not to fall into the trap and slip on the banana skin of saying from here we will get there, because you want to be designing from the future back. And the other thing, which is something that I think you'll see thematically through the 7 tips that I've shared with you today to include in any strategy that you're delivering that is around change and transformation, is separatism. And what I mean by that is this: so much of our strategy, it's funny, isn't it? You know, when we create visions and we feel that we have a purpose that drives change and transformation, there is a sense of humanity there. There is a sense of human connection there. And all of a sudden we say, right, okay, so now we need to write a strategy. Now we need to understand the strategy of how we're going to deliver that. And suddenly there's this separatism. Suddenly everything becomes about organization. Everything becomes about structure, process, technology, timelines, methodology, things on top of things on top of things. And we lose the human connection. So what I'm saying here is try not to, in your strategy, slip on the banana skin of falling into the trap of becoming organization, structure, thing focused, as opposed to human focused in your strategy. Because if there's a place where you can start to see success in terms of humanization, it's in that strategy, right? So separatism is a big banana skin that you do not want to fall over and slip into. Okay, so I just want to open the table now, and as I say, I just really want to see, you know, how everybody feels and what's going on in everybody's minds about those 7 tips around humanizing transformation. Just thinking about stuff that you worked on, or it might be something that you worked on in the past, it might be something that you're working on at the moment. You're writing a strategy for a program, for a big transformation project, for a learning and development, you know, design, who knows. But I guess the thing for me is, which point is most powerful to you is something that I just want to put out as a provocation. And then maybe if there's any, hopefully if there's any questions, then we can open it up. So the first thing for me really is, which one of those 7 points has kind of resonated for you? Which one do you feel is the most powerful, is the one that you feel could really make a difference to anything that you're designing, any strategies that you're writing? And then what we can do is we can go into an open roundtable from there. So I have just turned my little share screen off, and what I'd like to do is I'd like to open the discussion. So provocation first, and then we'll go into Q&A. Which one of those tips do you feel is most relevant, most resonant, most powerful for you? Who's willing to come off mute, open up, and have a chat about that?
You know I wouldn't mind, Mel. So
yeah, no, you go, Lorraine. Lovely.
For me, it's number two, it's human. I think that is the key thing that gets missed every time. And people fall into that trap, just like you said. It's about the what, and it's about the actions, and it's about, you know, the timelines, and it all becomes very disconnected from that human perspective, and I think that is critical. But in true Mel style, I'm not picking one, I'm going to pick two, and the other one is that last one. Small is beautiful, because it comes into my head constantly. And in particular, that other phrase that you use, if it's too hard, it's not small enough. And, you know, sometimes when you're sitting puzzling over something, you just think, hang on a minute. If it's too hard, then I need to break it down more, and that small is beautiful. So, so that's what I think.
That's brilliant. Thanks, Lorraine. And, you know, I love that, the fact that it's the second tip that you've picked up as well as the last one, because in that human bit, I'm not saying that it's easy to begin with in terms of, you know, it's easy to put the word mindset into a strategy. It's harder to put human into a strategy. Yeah. And I think that's what's really important. And it's quite interesting, because yesterday I was on a masterclass. I was facilitating and hosting a masterclass. And what was really interesting about that particular masterclass was one of the themes that came out of it, when people were sharing their stories around change and transformation. And actually a lot of the stories were when it doesn't work, when it's difficult, was this: you can have really good people involved in change and transformation, but that doesn't make it human. You've got to put effort into humanizing transformation and change. You really have to put an effort into it. It doesn't just happen. It is about us being competent and understanding how you genuinely do it. And it was a really, really interesting point that came up. And of course, your last one, small is beautiful. I don't need to say anything about that, because you know that is one of the biggest mantras of my life, isn't it? So that's brilliant. Thank you for that, Lorraine. That's fantastic. What about someone else? Anyone else willing to share which one of those tips resonates with them, or they feel is most powerful?
I quite like the belief statements. I think that really just kind of, I just felt that would empower me a bit more as well, by being able to, you know, when especially when you're trying to get people on board and stuff like that, to demonstrate your own belief in something kind of brings everyone on the journey. So telling that story, that I believe that this, and therefore they've got that narrative in their mind and they can jump on the bus. That's how that kind of resonated with me when you spoke about it. And I think that's something which I probably need to do more of.
I love that. Thanks, Joanna. And you know, there's a beautiful story in the community that was given by Nicola Wood, who heads up HR globally for a big bank, Standard Chartered, and they designed a transformation program for, I think it was somewhere between 86 and 89,000 employees, right, all over the world. You can imagine the complexity, you can imagine the diversity. One of the key success factors in that transformation program, which by the way is continually breaking all records in terms of engagement levels and outputs and target goals, is this: that they spent time with the leadership team to get the leadership team to workshop a set of unified belief statements that they were willing to own and socialize to support the strategy. So I think that's fantastic. So I guess, you know, Joanna, what you're saying is, if I myself, as the owner of the strategy, am able to create belief statements, that directly connects me to it, which means that I am a participant as opposed to separate. So that's really, really powerful. Equally powerful is if you have stakeholders and leaders that you need to be on board to support the delivering the success of the strategy, is perhaps do something similar with them in terms of workshopping and get them to, you know, unite around a set of belief statements as opposed to a set of objectives and goals. Does that make sense? Yeah. Brilliant. Fantastic. We've got a little bit more time for some more input, some more ideas. Stella, it'd be a terrible thing if I picked on you, but what about me picking on you?
The downfall of putting your video camera on, eh? Yeah, no, I think for me is actually number 6 is that the strategy is not the solution, and that we've got to be really flexible. And I think quite often when you're delivering a kind of strategy, you think this is it, this is the whole thing, and you've got it all mapped out, but actually perhaps not being quite so. So yeah, know your journey, know your, as we said, you're at the future, this is where we need to be, coming back and how we're going to get there. But that's only, it's like it's penciled in. We need to be ready to rub some bits of that out and say that's not working, and be really agile in that, in terms of that shift. And I think quite often in certain areas where my experience has been, it's been quite rigid. Like we have to have it all mapped, and how is this happening, when is it happening? It's all so rigid, there's no room for flexibility. And if we're not building that in, that's when we get, quite often you hear, oh, there's been slippage, or we've hit this or we've hit that. But that's because we haven't built in that flexibility. So I'm actually taking that away to say there might be bits of this where we have a strategy, but actually we may not have all the answers yet because we haven't spoke to all the stakeholders, or we haven't perhaps got a bit of trial and error. And we have to build that into that planning. And I think I've taken away that that's something that we do, our organization do pretty poorly, actually. There's too many having to, almost explain why you've not met set target, we've not made a deadline, etc. But actually that's the failure, was in the planning part of, actually this is a notional date, but we have to accept that, to get to the right future and the right implementation of the strategy, needed to allow for, as you say, the human elements of all of that build up these elements, to allow for some time for growth and input from that. And that does just take time.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I love what you said there. And what is lovely that resonates with what you're saying is that you can set up transformation for a fall by being too rigid in your strategy. And if you can infuse this sense of agility and adaptability in the strategy itself, then what you're doing is you're basically opening the door to success. There's always going to be more than one right answer. If we've got our vision, we've got our overarching goals, outcomes, who we will be at the point of achieving those is very difficult for us to recognize today. But what we can do is recognize how many right potential pathways will get us there. And what that does is, if you can say in your strategy, these are potential right answers for design delivery, what that allows is, even in your governance, when you're setting up your project management governance, what you can do is you can set it up based on, when it's not the single path, we have to set up our governance based on 6 different paths that we have identified in our strategy. Bingo, what you've got is one of the core principles of adaptive governance. So right at the very start, you're setting yourself up for success as opposed to setting yourself up for failure. You're taking away that rigidity. So I loved what you just said there. That absolutely resonates with me. Does that make sense, Stella? Yeah, brilliant. Excellent. Thank you so much. We've got a couple more minutes, so it's either we can gift these minutes to ourselves today, or a couple more minutes to allow for other people to maybe share some thoughts, some ideas. No, looks like we've got. It's like, did I say the word gift? Was that? I shouldn't have said the word gift, should I? I've said the word gift, and everybody's going, right, come on, Mel, I can go and boil the kettle. And I know that Mazine is only an hour or so away from having to get a flight. So okay, well, what I will do is I will gift us all a few moments at the end of today. I'll stay online, so if anybody would like to talk to me, I'll always stay online as always. But I will say thank you so much for joining us today. These are the 7, not the 5 tips for humanizing your transformation strategy or your digital transformation strategy. We'll pop those into the follow-up email as well, so you'll get the recording. But what we'll do is we'll put a little bit of an infographic together for those tips so that you can get that as well, so that you can remind yourself of those. And what I will say is humanize your strategy. That's the first step to success, right? So let's see how we can use those tips in our digital transformation strategies and our plans moving forward. Have a fantastic day, everybody. Mazine, I hope you have a safe flight home today. And thanks for joining us. Have a great time. And I shall see you hopefully same time, same place next week. Thanks, Mazine. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thanks a lot. Bye.
Bye-bye.